The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today. It's What Would You Do? Ethical Choices, and it's being presented by my colleague David Orr, who happens to be the director of the New York LTAP Center, which is located at Cornell University. It's the Cornell Local Roads Program. And this is Victoria Beal with the Ohio LTAP Center. We are so pleased to have you on the webinar today. I'm going to give just a quick bio about David because I don't want to distract from any time you'll have with him in this hour to go over these ethical dilemmas and to be able to learn, hopefully, the right path you need to take. So David Orr, who is a licensed engineer for the state of New York, a PE. He is the director of the Cornell Local Roads Program. And formerly, though, he was the deputy highway superintendent for Yates County. And David has nearly 40 years of road-related experience. He clarified with me right before we started this that it was 38 years now. So I want to welcome everyone to the webinar. And David, are you ready to get things rolling?
I am ready, and thank you for the nice warm welcome, Victoria.
Thank you.
So good afternoon, and hopefully we'll have both a little bit of fun and you'll learn something today. Today we're going to be talking about ethics. What would you do if an ethical dilemma occurs? So we're getting started. Before we go too far, though, just some control issues for you, just to let you know. If you don't have the box up with a chat pod and information on it, there should be on your screen somewhere a big orange arrow. Find the orange arrow and click on it, and when you do, you'll expand if it isn't already expanded, and you'll see things such as controls for your sound. You can also download a handout which has some of the references that are available that we can look at if you want to look at those later on. And there's also a place to put your questions. And Victoria is monitoring the chat questions, or excuse me, the question box, and I'm looking at the chat if I have to, if I remember, to answer your questions, hopefully in real time, okay? And so just a close-up there so you can see outlines just to show you what it would look like for those who are interested. Now, those of you who know me here in New York State, I apologize. I don't have any of my infamous coasters to sling at you, so it's going to be virtual slinging today. I have one of the old ones sitting in my office at work, but I want to keep in mind that hopefully we'll have a good time. So if I sling a coaster at you virtually, we'll get it to you in real life sometime as we move down the road. Now, I did check, as someone asked, and I did check for professional development hours for those who are engineers who would like to get them. I did check here in New York State. This session will be worth 1 professional development hour. That's the good news. The bad news is that only the person who's officially registered is going to be eligible. Okay, so if you need a PDH for this particular session or any of the others that we're doing during this interesting spring, we're going to try to have PDHs available, including the session that's on Thursday. It is officially going to be a course, not educational activities for those who care, because in New York State it does matter. And to get this, you're going to have to, at the end of the session, you will get a certificate, you'll get an attendance thing from Victoria and the Ohio LTAP Center. You'll have to send that in to us, and our email will be on the last screen, so you'll be able to know what email address you need to send it into. Now, for other states, you'll need to check with your LTAP Center. Every state has slightly different rules on if you need professional development hours. And so you'll need to check with your LTAP Center. And I know there's folks from many different states who are on today. So let's start talking about ethics. Before we get into that too far, I'm going to start by opening up our first poll question. So first poll question should be launched now. And who do you work for? You work for county, state, an engineering firm, a vendor, or do you work for the weekend? And we're getting responses. Victoria likes to wait till 80% of you have voted. So we'll see if we can get to 80% here. And we have 80%. And now I'm going to share the results. Okay, so about half of you work for the state, 17% for counties, 27% for engineering firms, There are 4% of you who are honest, and you work through the weekend. That's good to know. Okay. And another one, just because I'm curious, it helps me as we go through these dilemmas. How long have you been at your job? Are you brand new? 1 to 4 years, 5 to 9 years, or greater than 10? And I'm not talking about total time. I'm talking about how long you've been in your current position. Okay, so while I've got close to 40 years total, I've been at Cornell for about 20 to 25 years, that kind of thing. Okay, everybody got that one quick? And we share the results. So most of you have been with your agency, your organization for more than 10 years. There's a few new folks. And one of the things I always make sure people realize, there's a lot of experience out there. We need to, probably more than ever, even though we're social distancing, we definitely need to communicate as much as possible. Okay? And then last one, even though I was asking a question about an individual, I know some of you may have more than one person at your site. So just so I can get a sense of that, how many folks are at your site? One person is probably the most common, but we'll see here what y'all tell me. Okay.
I hope that they're social distancing if it's more than one.
Well, we have, if you look here, I'll share it with you. We actually have 14% of you are 10 or more. So I hope you're like they did with the house. Everybody sat in the visitors gallery. You're social distancing. So, okay. So that helps me. Now, so we're going to start talking about ethics. And I actually start with a picture of a pirate flag because pirates actually had an ethical code. In fact,
David, I'm still seeing the poll results.
You're still seeing the poll results. Interesting.
I am.
You are. Let's just see here. I'm going to just try something. Do you see them now still?
Yep. How long have you been at your job? We've not had this happen before, so it's interesting.
Technology, isn't it fun? Let me try this one more time. Did that help?
No, we're still seeing how long have you been at your job.
Still long have you been at your job? That's interesting.
What I might do real quick is let me try just moving you to a presenter.
Okay.
As opposed to an organizer, if it lets me do that. And maybe that'll shut off the whole polling thing. Nope.
No.
It doesn't.
Interesting.
Okay.
So where is it on the screen?
I'm just seeing the one, how long have you been at your job poll, so let's see. Hide. I just hit hide.
Don't you love technology?
Yeah.
It's okay.
Going through to make sure they're all hidden. There, I'm still seeing it on my end. I don't know if the audience is still seeing the poll question too or not. Someone wants to put in the chat pod or the comment pod,
Yep,
let us know.
I see someone
Yep,
noting.
they are.
They are.
So,
wow.
All right.
Interesting.
Well, why don't you stop sharing your screen real quick?
Okay.
If you have that option, and then try sharing again. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your comments. Okay. And then start sharing again, and we'll see if we can get the polls to go away.
No one sees my screen?
No, we just see the opening screen. Oh, there we see pirates now. Awesome.
Do you see the pirate now?
We do. We see it in that presenter view.
Okay. You should
now
see
we see full screen.
Full screen.
Yep.
Okay. There we go. We're back to
there we go.
Okay.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone.
It's the pirate flag. That's what it was. So when we talk about ethics, one thing about ethics is pirates did have an ethical code. They actually had rules. They were pretty strict in some respects. In fact, one of the interesting things, a lot of pirates actually had the democratic system to choose the captain. Whoever was the best captain got to stay the captain. But ethics is an interesting thing. In fact, there's lots of debates about what is ethics. There's different kinds of ethics. There's personal ethics, there's professional ethics, There's even societal ethics that come into play. And of course, ethics are pretty important. You might see somebody cheating a little bit here and there, but ethics is the kind of thing it's really hard to write a law that says this is good or bad. When I was developing this course the first time, right after New York State made it a requirement that we had to have professional development hours and an ethics requirement in that PDH requirement, I used some books, and they're in the reference form that you've got available to you. And it was rather interesting. At the beginning of one of the books on the ethical engineer, there was a notice. And the notice said that you were supposed to do the ethical thing provided there is no legal duty to do so otherwise. Now you think about that. If something is important from an ethical standpoint, shouldn't that be more important than the legal standpoint? But that's not always true. And that actually causes us some issues, which we'll be talking about later on. Now, if you're wondering and you can't read the thing, this is a Chinese, it's a little humorous thing. It says that wasn't chicken if you can't read the picture screen. Now, I've got some examples. I've shared this with other colleagues at LTAP centers across the country. And one of the colleagues who actually shared quite a bit was Ted Green, who's also an engineer with the New Jersey LTAP Center. And so I wanted to make sure he got credit, because again, that's part of ethics, giving people credit when credit is due. Now, before we get into these dilemmas that I promised to talk about with the title, I just want to remind you there are ethics and there are canons that most agencies have, okay? The Society of Professional Engineers and the American Society of Civil Engineers have very, very similar ethical canons. In fact, the first few are almost exactly the same word for word. They vary quite a bit, actually, towards the end, but the thing is they have some similarities. All of them talk about safety, health, and welfare of the public coming first, okay? They also talk about performing services only in your area of competence. Don't go stamping electrical engineering plans if you're a civil engineer and vice versa. Issue objective and truthful public statements. Act for your employer or client as a faithful agent or trustee, which of course can get you into trouble if you're supposed to also issue truthful public statements, if you think about it. Okay? Avoid deceptive acts and conflicts of interest. Okay? These first 5 are the same in almost every one of the ethical canons that are out there. There are people who actually argue that we shouldn't have ethical canons, that we should let ethics be controlled for other reasons. I actually like to put things down just to see, to talk about them, but they make some legitimate points, something to think about. But at the end of the day, make sure that you've got a good ethical code, okay? And be willing to stand up when need be, okay? To uphold and enhance the honor, integrity, and dignity of the engineering profession. Otherwise, you might have to do this. And again, I like a little humor. There appears to be a whistleblower in our midst. Well, hopefully you actually deal with whistleblowers the right way. And there are some rules about that, but there's also some ethics involved as well. Now, just as a reminder, if you want to list all the references that are available, they're on a handout. The handout is in the handout pod on the GoToWebinar screen if you need to find that. Now, your ethical policies, you should have them. The best ethical policies are self-enforcing, transparent, and flexible, okay? Ethics is a hard thing, as we're going to be talking about this quite a bit, but it's very important that you've got a good policy. But the best ones are self-enforcing. You don't have to go out there and be the ethics police. People know when they're doing the right thing. But more important than anything else, whether you have a policy or you don't, make sure you are honest with the public. If I had to pick the one thing beyond the safety issue that I see that frustrates me is when people say something they know is probably not true. One of the most famous actually occurred in Michigan. You may have seen this in the news. And it said Flint water is safe to drink. This was a news release from the Flint city government. I don't think that was true. And yet they were saying it. So make sure you're saying truthful statements. Absolutely vital. Of all the ethical things we can do, make sure you're telling the truth, especially to the public. Now, part of the reason I developed this particular ethics class was an old crusty-haired professor. His name was Floyd Slate. Now, I tried to get a picture of Floyd wearing his normal outfit. I knew him when I was an undergraduate. He was wearing a Hawaiian shirt, but I couldn't find one. So I'll show you a picture of him in a minute wearing a tie. That's what they sent me. But what he liked to say was that you need to know what you would do before the ethical incident happens. He said every one of you in your career is going to have ethical dilemmas that occur. And if you've thought about what those ethical dilemmas might be, you will actually have a better answer. You're going to know what you need to say. And of course, we were undergraduates. We knew better. Sure, he was right. And so I'm going to show you some scenarios. And those scenarios are all real world scenarios. Some of them happened to me. Some of them have happened to other folks. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about those scenarios and see how you respond. Now, the scenarios, I read them to you. They're pretty simple, but I want you to think about what you would do. Okay? What you would do personally. Okay? There's going to be up to 5 choices. There'll be a poll that pops up after that. Okay? And choose the answer closest to your original thought. Okay? It's pretty easy. A couple of critical points. Yes, Victoria?
I was going to say, I'll run the polls for you.
Okay, cool.
Maybe that'll keep it from hanging up again.
Well, hopefully. Some critical points. First off, this is simple. There sometimes, these are very, very complicated issues sometimes. I'm simplifying them to do this in 1-hour session. So be aware of that fact. Okay? There may be times when your own organization's ethical policy is more restrictive. Okay? I don't want you to answer based upon your organization's policy. If you have an organizational policy that is different than your own ethics, vote with your own ethics today. It's all anonymous. We aren't recording any of this in terms of who's doing what answer. The only thing we're recording is the slide deck and my talking. So think about what you would feel is ethical, not your agency or organization's policies. Okay? So now the poll questions, they're anonymous. There's 2 types of polls we're going to have. Some of them I call single choice polls. These are, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of choices, and generally there's only one ethical choice between A, B, C, D, and E, okay, that you think is the most ethical. Sometimes, however, there may be 5 or 6 things you need to do. What I want you to do in those cases is, what's the most important activity? What's the thing that if you had to choose one thing you want to do first, what would it be? So let me illustrate that for you. We're going to start with our poll question, single choice. I work for, you've already answered this question, so we don't need to bring the poll up, but that's an example of a single choice question. I work for a local government, a state, a consultant, contractor, and the 14% of you who are honest and you work for the weekend, okay? That's a single choice question, okay? A critical choice question where there's multiple choices. What swag have you picked up at a conference? So think about the last time you went to a conference, okay? What did you pick up at the vendor booths, okay? So the choices that are going to show up on the poll question are candy, keyring. My computer's being really slow here, Victoria. Hang on a sec.
I can read it off for you. Candy, keyring, pen, coaster, and bag.
Okay, so you can launch that poll for me.
I will. It's up there.
It's up.
People can start voting.
They're starting to vote. And again, you may have picked up more than one thing. I just want you, what's the first thing that came to mind? And you got your 80%.
We're over 80%. We're there. I'm going to close the poll and show the results.
Okay.
So 53% pen, 27% candy, 3% keyring, and 2% coaster.
Okay, and 15% got a bag.
Oh, I forgot that one. Sorry.
Bags are getting more and more popular, you know. But again, that's a critical choice question. Just to keep that in mind as we go through here. Not really an ethics one, though. There's the question about what you do with all those items, but that's a different day. So just to illustrate to you the kinds of things to think about, I'm going to give you a real world problem. Okay? You go down to the
David,
local.
we're going to have you stop sharing and reshare again. I'm sorry.
Huh.
I'm still seeing the poll.
That's really weird.
It is. So
Okay.
It's a good thing you're pretty quick with technology.
I try, but that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
Did that work?
Yep, we see you.
Okay.
The retired engineer, what would you do?
What would you do? So you go down to the gym, or you had been at the gym, or you will go to the gym, and you're down at the gym, and you see somebody who's an old retiree roughhousing in the shower with a 10-year-old. Well, what would you do? Would you stop the roughhousing, call the cops, report the incident, walk away and say nothing, or talk to the retiree later, one-on-one? And now think about that. This is a real world situation. I'm not going to do a poll question on this particular one, but I just want you to realize these kind of dilemmas are tough. And this is an actual case. You've probably heard about it. Sad to say. The person in this particular case was Mike McQuarrie. And whatever your response would be, realize this. The Lancet, a medical journal out of the United Kingdom, did a study, and they actually found that 25% of people who were trained to look for possible child abuse would have done nothing. Now, most of us would agree that's probably not the right ethical thing to do. Mr. McQuarrie reported it. But what would you do? So what I want to do now is give you ethical issues that are related to our activities as engineers and in public works in the public sector. So we'll start with a simple one. That should be, I hope, a fun one, and that's hitching a ride, okay? So, Victoria, while I'm reading it, you could go ahead and launch this particular poll, and the answers are going to be pretty easy. But you're hitching a ride, okay? Going to a meeting, you work for the county, and you're going to be going to a meeting 50 miles away, and then the DOT, the Department of Transportation at the state level, is going to be also at the same meeting. Your buildings are next door to each other. Do you share a ride? Do you drive separately? Or do you drive together but promise not to discuss the meeting in either direction? So what would you do going to this meeting 50 miles away?
And they're voting.
And they are voting.
Yep.
12%. They're thinking about it.
All right, I'm over 80% now.
Yeah, they were quick.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and close it up.
Okay. Now, that's a classic example of one where there's actually probably two right answers. Okay? In terms of driving separately, why would driving separately be a good idea? Well, if the meeting happens to have a possibility of information, conflict of interest, by driving separately, you reduce that conflict of interest. Okay? But if you drive separately, aren't you using more fuel? Aren't you actually wasting taxpayer dollars in some respects? So you could actually argue both of those have some ethical value to them. Some of you voted for driving together but promised not to discuss the meeting in either direction. And while there might be individuals who could do that, most of the time the public isn't going to believe you. So be careful about putting yourself in a situation where you know you haven't done something wrong, but the public perception is, nah, they were probably talking, they were colluding there. So don't put yourself in those situations. Even though you personally might feel okay with it, remember what the public is thinking may matter even more. Okay, here we go, Victoria. Hopefully it hides. Can you hide it?
It didn't. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But we could just go to your next scenario if you want. We could just roll right through the poll questions.
We could do that. We could try that and see how that works.
Don't get to see all the great pictures you have in here. But...
we'll play it by ear. Maybe we'll put the pictures up on the screen or something. But so the next one is coffee and donuts. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and open up the poll question with the coffee and donuts question.
It's out there.
Okay. So in this particular case, you're on the job site and a vendor comes along and he's bought a whole bunch of coffee and donuts for you. What are you going to do? Are you going to accept the coffee and donuts? Are you going to offer to pay for the coffee and donuts? Are you going to offer to split the costs so that you cover your share? Or are you going to offer to pay and refuse the donuts if rejected?
They're voting fast and furious.
They are, and the different split than I see a lot of times when I've done this in New York. Interesting. Okay, you got your 80%.
I think there might be a nuance here too, David, about whether or not you're a public sector employee or private sector employee, but
Oh, a
I'll
lot of
let
these
you
questions,
deal with that.
actually
And
split those differences apart. Okay,
I'm going to close this up and
perfect.
share the results.
Absolutely. So most of you would accept the donuts. Okay, probably not a big deal. One box of donuts and some coffee. If you don't accept it, you certainly don't want to waste that coffee and donuts. That would not be good. Okay. Some of you would offer to pay for it. Okay. Some of you would offer to split the cost. Quite a few of you would refuse. Okay. And some of you have policies probably that say you can't accept anything. Okay. And those are all legitimate answers in some respects. But think about this. If you accepted it on Monday, would you accept it again on Tuesday? And then on Wednesday? And then on Thursday? At what point does it go from us being a guy coming by to be nice to suddenly becoming almost, hey, where are donuts and coffee? So where's that ethical line? How many times do they bring by the coffee and donuts before it becomes an issue? Or if they bring by a hat, or if they bring by a small, token, where does it draw the line? So refusing is almost always an okay option. But again, you need to know what your own ethical line is. Again, not whether there's a legal issue. That varies quite a bit from state to state. Okay. So I tell you what, Victoria, so why don't you go to the next one? We'll see what happens there. The next example we're going to do is a hard
It's
hat.
out there.
Okay. So you show up on a job site. Okay. In this particular case, you're working for the public sector agency. Okay. You have a contractor doing work for you. You show up on the job site and you see people who are not wearing their hard hats. What are you going to do? You could do lots of different things, but what's the first thing that came to mind? Do you just walk away? Do you talk to the worker involved? Do you talk to the contractor? Do you talk to the owner? Okay. That, in other words, you're working for the county, but do you talk to somebody within your own organization, or do you call up the state and talk to OSHA or the Department of Labor? Who are you going to talk to?
We're almost over 80. There we went.
There you go.
Okay. I'm going to close it up so we can share the results.
Okay, perfect. Now, in this
Share.
particular case, most of you would talk to the contractor. Why do we see that when I've done this face to face with people? The most common answer I get why we talk to the contractor, because they're much more likely to get it changed. If they see their own people not putting on the hard hats, they're the ones who are most likely to enforce the hard hat, okay, more than anything else. Talking to the worker, that's not a bad idea, and some workers will be receptive, but some may not be. You may need to do both. I hope you wouldn't walk away. I really would. I would hope if there's anything that you wouldn't do that, just because from the standpoint of that could get you in trouble, especially if you're an engineer or somebody with responsible charge. You don't want to get in a situation where you walk away from something that you shouldn't walk away from. So keep that in mind. Okay. Now let me see here something. Victoria, if you could, I'm going to purposely stop and re-show my screen because I want to show
Sure.
this particular picture. Okay. This picture was sent to us by one of our towns here in New York State, and it shows what happens to our hard hat after it gets hit by a tree. Now you're thinking to yourself, well, that hard hat didn't do a good job. No, that hard hat saved a person's life from, or at least they saved him from a concussion. Because while the tree limb broke the hard hat, it took all the energy, and the guy holding the hard hat in his hand walked away unscathed. So if people want to know why you wear a hard hat, that's why. They're absolutely vital. Okay. Okay, so we'll go to the next one here. So now you're at a conference. We've opened things back up. We're back to having conferences, and you're going to go get your PDHs, your professional development hours. Okay. Now you get a phone call. You know, we all have cell phones now. They're ubiquitous. You get a phone call. What are you going to do? Are you going to ignore the call, get those PDHs? Are you going to take the call and forfeit the PDHs? Are you going to step out for just a few seconds and go, hey, I'm in the middle of a session, I need those PDHs, and go back in? Or are you going to take the call and come back towards the end of the session, 20, 30 minutes from now, and get your credit? Let's see how you voted.
Okay, we're almost there. We're over 80%.
There you go.
Close it and share the results.
Okay. Most of you would ignore. Most of you would just take a quick step out and come back in. And both of those are perfectly acceptable. But we all know there are going to be times when you've got a really valuable client that calls you up, or you've got a call from your supervisor, or the mayor if you work for a city, or the county supervisor, that you've got to take the call. Well, okay, you might have to forfeit those PDHs. So it's going to be situational. And situational ethics happens all the time. And so while right now we're all going, oh yeah, I can ignore it, or I can take a quick step away, there may be times when you need to take that call. Okay? I have to admit, I hope you don't do D. I know a few of you voted for it, but if you go out and you don't stay in to earn the PDHs, don't get back in there and get the PDHs. You haven't really earned them. Because maybe you missed something important. Maybe you missed a person talking about a certain strength of steel or how we do a certain connection. And then you don't know that information and you apply something incorrectly. So think about that from the standpoint of the people that we serve. Don't go back in and get those PDHs. And it's okay. Sometimes we have to take and forfeit the PDHs. Okay.
Sorry, I launched your next poll already.
You launched it. She's quick on me. Well, I'm going to stop sharing and reshare anyway. So can you hide that one?
Sure, I'll close it real quick. Okay.
The reason is that this, again, some of the pictures I'm not that worried about. This particular picture is one of my favorites. I call it my OSHA picture. I went through one time with a class and 15 violations would shut the job down in this one photograph. It's pretty impressive. If you're wondering what that line is, it's running there. That's got the chain hooks to it.
We're seeing the poll questions still, David.
Oh, you're still seeing the poll questions.
Yep.
Try this again.
All right, there we go.
There we go. That's as a 15 violations we figured out. That line you see running along, that's a gas line that's unsupported. Yeah. So you come across a trench like this, okay? And it doesn't look too good. What are you going to do? Are you going to wait for the cave-in, physically intervene, call 911, call OSHA, or call the owner of the property? So you could go ahead and launch that one now, Victoria.
I might not be able to relaunch. I'm sorry.
Let's just see here.
It wouldn't let me. Are you going to try it on your end?
I'm going to try it on my end. Nope, it won't let me relaunch. Interesting. Let's just see here.
Well, what did you do in this situation, David, since you took the picture?
Well, what I did in this situation is the same thing I did in, well, actually I did two different things in two different situations when I've come across this, okay? In this particular case, I hate to say it, but this is on our campus. This is on a road very close to our building. It was actually a picture taken by one of the students who worked for us. And when he comes back and tells me about it, I picked up the phone and called people I know at the facilities department, and they quickly went out there and simply shut the job down until they got the trenches back in place. I also happened to have this happen when I was in your fair city, Victoria, Columbus, Ohio. I was in a place called the Short North, a beautiful little place to wander around, and I came across exactly this, a 12-foot deep trench, and there were people working in the non-trenched section. And I went over and found one of your police people, and I said, that's unsafe. And he walked over to talk to the contractor to try to see what he could do, because I know if I had talked to them, they're going to ignore me. They don't know me from Adam. So, but what would you do? Don't wait for a cave-in. That's the one thing. If I could say one thing, please don't wait for a cave-in. We all know somebody who has been hurt seriously by it. And how deep does it have to be? We're talking only a few feet, even if you're standing up. And what happens if you're bent over and that thing caved in? You could have a really, really bad day. Okay. So let's see here. Ah, yes, this is a classic one. This is an actual case. Got a bridge. This is a picture from the report. Okay, so this is a bridge inspection being done. And as you can see, it's going to be really hard to measure scour underneath about where that shovel is because it's all frozen.
I think our slide hasn't quite advanced yet. Oh, there we go.
There
now
you
I
go.
see it.
It's the internet's being really slow, laggy. It's okay. So obviously, like we know, all bridges have to be inspected every 2 years. And in New York State, we do something called flagging, either a safety flag or a structural flag. There's different kinds of flags that we've got. So you come across this situation, everything is completely frozen, and there was a flag due to scour at this particular location. You can't get into to make the measurements. What are you going to do? Do you not take any readings? Use last year's values? Call the owner? Document the frozen conditions or issue a new flag? And the reality is, we know that you're actually going to be doing more than one thing. What came to your mind first? What did you think about? Now, I will admit, I know that the rules are different from state to state, so your state might not have the same rules about issuing a new flag or not, so I don't want to make that assumption. Okay? But Victoria, we've got over 80%. You're showing the results? Cool.
I did.
Good.
Sorry.
Hey, that's fine. So obviously you can't take any readings. It's frozen. Okay? You shouldn't be using last year's values. If I had to pick the one choice to not do, it's using last year's values. Because how do you know what they are? Calling the owner, was a lot of you chose. That's a good answer. Documenting the frozen conditions. Absolutely. Hey, that's a perfectly legitimate reason why you can't do documenting of the frozen conditions. And while you might continue the flag on the bridge, depending on your state's rules, you probably don't want to be issuing a new flag because, again, we don't really know. In this particular case, what happened? They used last year's values and issued a flag based upon them. And that person no longer has a license in New York State. So some choices should be more obvious, I hope. Again, what's the best thing to keep in the mind of the public? Safety, health, and welfare. Okay? Now I'm going to go back away from the engineering side for a second, and we're going to go to a conference, and you're going to get a raffle. Now, you've been sent to the conference, and it was paid for by your employer. That's an important thing. Paid for by your employer. And there's a big prize, a big TV, an iPad, something really valuable. And you win. Are you going to accept the prize and take it home? Are you going to take it to work? Are you going to refuse the prize? Are you going to accept the prize if you can pay the nominal value for it? Or are you going to accept it publicly but turn it back in later?
I pushed the button too quickly, David.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. We'll never know. It's okay.
We're just going to assume everybody was incredibly ethical on this question.
But the problem is there's more than one right answer here. That's the key of ethics that makes it so challenging. There's good arguments that can be made for refusing the prize. That hey, this is beyond the nominal value. This is really pushing it in terms of what you should be accepting, especially if you're in the public sector. Okay? But even in the private sector, it might just be a little bit unethical to do that. But so refusing it is probably always okay. Taking the prize and taking it to work, heck, your employer paid for you to go. There's a benefit to your employer. There's actually some good arguments that can be made that that's a good thing to do. And I know some agencies that have done that. I can't really argue against that particular choice, even though that might not be mine. Taking it home, this is one of the ones you asked earlier, Victoria. People tend to vote based upon where they work. Public sector people vote differently than private sector people on that particular choice. The private sector people will take it home more often than the public sector folks. Even though I say don't vote on your policy, people vote on their own policy. It's the way it is. The one I would probably, if I had to pick the one I would be like, probably shouldn't do that, is to accept the prize publicly but turn it back in later. If you're going to refuse it, refuse it. It looks sort of bad if you accept it publicly. Even if you do return it later, nobody knows that. If you're going to refuse it, or don't even join the raffle at all. And I know some people who do that, and that's okay. Okay, now this next one, you've got a big contract, you're reviewing the bids, and you find the bids, and you noticed that one of the unit prices in the bids are completely wrong. Okay, it's a 1 penny, 1 cent per gallon of paint for about 1,000 gallons. It's not a big amount. Okay, are you going to accept that bid as submitted with no exceptions? Are you going to reject all the bids and rebid the project? Are you going to ask the contractor, hey, is this what I really wanted to put in? Is it correct? Or you can negotiate a change order later on. Okay, and I see we're starting to vote.
We're almost there. Why don't you close it when you're...
Okay. Okay, I'll close it.
I think I'm going to leave the rest of the polls to you.
Okay, that's fine.
Yep.
And I'm sharing. I hope people can see the results.
Yes.
So a lot of you would reject. Some of you would ask. Some of you would negotiate. And 8 would require, hey, we're going to accept it as submitted. And this is one of those ones where policies can actually make a difference. There may be policies that won't allow you to negotiate with the contractor, depending on how the contract was set up and how it was worded. Okay. Victoria probably is better at that than I am because she's got more of that background. But what would you do ethically? It would be nice if you could ask the contractor and say, hey, did you just make a math error? But the risk you run into is the contractor might be putting in a low number because he knows I'm not using 1,000 gallons of paint. I can use this to keep my total price down, or I've got some extra paint. Okay. So keep in mind the policy may actually get in the way of what is ethically what you'd like to do. So rejecting all the bids and rebidding, the risk of that is now all the prices may go up because now everybody's like they put all the time and effort in, they have to do it again. They might not be as sharp on their pencil the next time. The risk of doing a negotiated change order later, it might cost you more than you think. Okay. So again, what would you do from an ethical standpoint? Not what you would do necessarily from a policy or legal standpoint. Something to think about. Now, when I used to work in the county over in Western New York, I got a vehicle assigned to me. So sometimes I would go on the way home, I would stop and I would pick up milk. Now, the grocery store was a quarter mile out of the way. Okay, I couldn't drive straight home. I had to go out of my way about a quarter mile on about a 10-mile trip to my house. Given the choice, what would you do? Would you drive home and get your own car and come back? Would you stop on the way home at the grocery store anyway? Stop on the way home but tell the boss what you're doing? or stop at a parking lot that's on the direct route and walk the quarter-mile over to the store and back. Okay? So we'll see what y'all thought about. Ooh, got a comment too. We'll come back to the comment in just a minute. Okay, we've got our 80%. We're going to show the results. Okay, so about half of you would drive home. From an ethics standpoint, you can't really be wrong by driving home. Okay? However, there is an energy cost to driving home, getting in your car, coming all the way back, and going back home. But from an ethics standpoint, that's a pretty one you can probably win that argument. Stopping on the way home, look, you're not going that far out of the way. But again, how far out of the way before it stops really being so far that it's really hard to justify? You know, if I was going 5 miles in the wrong direction, that's not justifiable. Okay? Now, some of you would tell the boss, and by the way, if you're wondering, that's what I did. I stopped on the way home, but I told my boss, hey, I'm stopping on the way home. And so he knew exactly what it was, and we talked about it. But how far that is, that's your own ethical choice. And probably there's 6% of you who are a lot healthier than most of us because you stopped and walked over and got your milk. Okay? So it's something to keep in mind. But the last question that we had that dealt with the policies, said in here, their policy dictates if there's an error, they have a right to withdraw the bid. Yeah, and their bid would get withdrawn, but some of the others might still get opened. And that's actually probably a good thing to do, where an honest mistake doesn't penalize them. They may not win that project, but not everybody is penalized, and that's probably a good way to do it. Oh, somebody else has a nice one here. Picking up the daughter from school in a government vehicle, not insured but saves fuel. And again, somebody noted, Victoria, that ODOT doesn't allow it. The policy says you can't do it, but some policies allow it. And some policies I actually do know they're covered if they're pre-approved. But that's entirely up to your agency whether they would want to do that or not. Okay, that's in the end, this issue of ethics versus legal issues versus policy. Okay, I'm going to hide that one. And we'll come down to this one. Yes, what price safety? Actually, this one I do have to, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Victoria, can you see the picture with the signs on it now?
Oh, yeah, I can see it.
Okay. The reason is that this one you have to be able to see the screen. You're designing safety improvements for a busy intersection, okay? And you've come up with 4 alternatives that show a similar cost-benefit ratio, okay? Public support varies quite a bit, okay? I'm giving you 4 choices. You see the numbers. Agency cost is the cheapest for signs, the most for a new bypass. Live saves go up proportionally, which is why the cost-benefit ratio tends to be about the same in all these cases. Which one are you going to choose? Okay, let's see here. They're voting quick there, Victoria.
My favorite option is winning right now. I'm so excited.
Your favorite option is winning right now?
Anybody
yes,
knows
yes,
me
yes.
knows what that is, yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, we got our 80%. I'll close it and I'll launch it, and we're going to make Victoria happy because over half of you chose the roundabout. Okay? Now, some people would say this isn't an ethical choice, but it actually becomes one because there are people who argue, and again, a legitimate ethical argument is, look, I'm saving 15 to 25 lives by putting in a new bypass. What's the value of a life? Something we're all learning about pretty quickly right now. Okay? It's really hard to say no to that. But there's also really pretty good arguments that say, wait a second, if I put in a new bypass at $3 million, it may not actually save as many as I think. And that's a lot of money, and I can't really get it back. So maybe I should go with the signs or the light, something that I can fix. But of course, you've got public support issues you've got to deal with. again, these are all challenges that you've got to deal with that makes ethics so much more fun in some respects than just plain old calculations. Can't always give a straight answer in this particular case. Okay? And I've got a comment here. What about the price of time to fund the improvements? You can include that. There's a method called life cycle cost analysis, LCCA. You can actually put that into the cost of the analysis and see, and you can include the cost of the construction in the analysis. And actually, I recommend that if you're doing a big project. I think that's a good idea. 6 roundabouts at those figures would save 60 to 120 lives for bypass costs. We're talking 1 roundabout or 1 bypass, not 6 roundabouts and 6 bypasses. Okay, so this particular one location, it would have been 3 million versus 500,000. I agree with you. Roundabouts might have saved more, but again, in that particular case, what would the the bypass cost have been? So each project may have its own unique flavor and calculations that you need to look at. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and hide that one. Go to the next one. Now, the next one's, I think, a sort of a fun one here. Let me see what time we've got. We're going to pick on a couple more because I want to make sure we're done at 3 o'clock. Value your time. So I'm going to give you a couple of my favorites from the list here. Okay. So you're going to meet Mr. Hobson. You own a gas facility, and you find out one of your employees is, they're falsifying the records for maintenance. Not the amount you're using. I'm talking about the maintenance records. You determine, hey, look, we can fix these things. It's just somebody didn't want to do the paperwork. And there's no real violations other than the falsified records. If you report this, you know the crew is not going to be happy with you. And you're also possibly going to face a big fine. So what came to your mind first? What are you going to do? Are you going to report the violation to the environmental folks? Are you going to try to train the employee? Are you going to discipline the employee? Are you going to fix the records? What came to your mind first? Not what you would do last. What would you do first? They're taking longer to vote on this one, Victoria.
It's a tough question.
That's why I've got it here. And again, these are all real world questions. Okay.
You're up over 80%. Yep.
Yep. So 30% of you, the first thing you said is, I'm going to go ahead and report the violation. Yes. And that you can't argue against that. Yes, I know we might get a fine. Yes, I know there's going to be some consequences, but that is the right thing to do, report the violation. And a lot of times, if you're honest and you've got good policies and procedures in place to make sure it doesn't happen again, a lot of agencies will actually go, we're not going to give you that big fine if you're open and upfront and honest. But yeah, it's a risk you might have to take, okay? And don't falsify anything, okay? Now, in some agencies, you might get terminated. I agree with you, okay? The comment was falsification of a government document equals termination. I agree with you. And if you need to terminate someone, that might be possible. In this particular case, the highway official knew, look, they weren't doing it because they were falsifying. It was more of just, frankly, a little bit of laziness. They were good employees other than that. They decided, they brought everybody in. They wouldn't tell which employee it was. Smart idea. They had already talked to that employee. They told everybody what they were doing. They reported the violation. They trained everybody, and they pretty much made it clear, look, you can't do this. This is too important to falsify. And they got a fine, yes, but it wasn't the big level they thought it would be. And more importantly, eventually the crew started realizing, yeah, these are pretty important records. So keep that in mind as you're thinking going forward. Now, again, I got time for some of my favorites here. Let's see. Oh, let's do this one here. Contractors not following specs. Okay. So you show up on a job site, and You're inspecting the job and you notice the contractor is not following the spec. So you walk over to the crew leader and you say, hey, you're not following the spec. And he says, oh, we're doing this and this because it's going to actually save you money in the long run. So are you going to ignore the difference? Are you going to document the change but keep quiet? Going to talk to the contractor about meeting the spec? Are you going to prepare a change order? Or are you going to inform the engineer? And again, you may do more than one. What came to your mind first? Okay, 80% of you have voted. We'll share the results. And I'm glad to see nobody would ignore the difference. If I had to pick the one thing, I usually try to throw one item in there that's like, please don't do. You don't want to ignore that. I don't really actually like B. I don't want to document the change and keep quiet because that could come back to bite you because it turns out maybe it isn't saving you money or there's a reason it's in the spec. Okay? Somebody is adding a little bit of stone dust because they're trying to get density and the stone dust makes it not drain as well. Or they're replacing out cheaper bolts that don't shear properly in the case of a safety equipment. So be very, very careful in this particular case. I would certainly want to talk to the contractor. I might need to change a change order. And I really think talking to the engineer to make sure, why was that in the spec? Is it important? Because you don't want to get it wrong, okay? So we'll hide the results and we'll go down to the next one.
This will probably have to be our last one, but hopefully we can talk you into doing this again for us, David.
I know this is going to be the last one, but this is again one of my favorites. So I'm trying to pick.
People have absolutely loved this.
So your particular, it's a town speed limits. Now in New York State, speed limits are set via the State Department of Transportation. Okay, so in this particular case, you had hired an engineering firm to do the study because you were a big town. Big towns can set their own speed limits. And the pressure was to lower the speed limit because people didn't like them speeding in front of a particular location. Okay? The engineering study concluded the speed limit should actually go from 45 to 55. It should actually go up by 5 miles an hour because of all the factors involved, either in U.S. limits if you're not in New York or the way the state does it here using 85th percentile. So your calculations should actually go up. Do you leave the speed limit at 45 and explain to the town why? Do you, under pressure, lower the speed limit to 30 because that's what the town wants? Do you raise the speed limit to 50? Or do you revise the study's findings to make sure that it looks like 25 or 30 miles an hour was the right choice? And it's being distributed. Okay, I gave you one easy one, I hope. Almost to 80.
While they're voting, I just want to let everybody know real quickly that please give us a week and we will have your certificates out to you for the webinar. And all of you who've stayed on the whole time are those who are going to be receiving them.
Okay, so here we go. Results. Most of you would leave it the same. Can't really argue 5 miles an hour difference. Raising it slightly, probably okay. Some of you would lower it to 30 under pressure. Please don't do that. That actually makes it less safe for everyone, if you think about it, because people drive based on how they feel, not based on a white and black sign. And if we lowered speed limits artificially, that gets us into trouble. Raising it to 50, if that's what the engineering study says, actually probably not a bad thing because it's consistency that matters. Remember, it's the manual of uniform traffic control devices. Consistency makes a difference. And revising that study data, boy, that could get you in trouble really fast. That's talked about earlier. Somebody says falsification of a government document, termination. That would be the equivalent of falsifying of a government document, termination. So, okay, I've got about 1 minute, I think. Yep, I got 1 minute. So let me come down here to the conclusions. remember to think about what you would do before the ethical incident happens. So think about the things you deal with on a day-to-day basis. What are you going to be worried about? Okay? Even simple problems are going to have multiple answers. That's just the nature of the beast. Okay? And the safety, health, and welfare of the public has to come first. That's just the nature of the beast. We have to do that first. Sometimes it causes people to not be happy with us, but as engineers, that's what we need to come and think about first. Now, as I'm walking around campus one time, I came across this particular item in a door, and it said, all door stops will be removed on Monday 2/22 for state fire inspection on Tuesday 2/23. Doors are not to be propped open during this time. Door stops will be returned on 2/24. What would you do ethically? Think about that. Okay? How do you deal with that? Because I hope you see there's an ethical dilemma here. I talked to our building person the following Monday to say, this probably isn't the way we should be trying to make things safe from a fire inspection standpoint. With that, I've kept you over for about 70 seconds. I apologize, but hopefully you got something out of it. Victoria,
I
it's all
am
yours.
absolutely certain that they did. And thank you so much, David. As always, your presentations are always a pleasure to be a participant in. And
No,
we really appreciate your time. Hopefully we can talk you into doing this again for us before the end of the calendar year.
well, and you're going to hear me on Thursday talking about good roads. And for those from New York who do want to get the PDHs, just send them to me at my email, which is on screen, david.orr@cornell.edu, once you get the certificate from Victoria.
Great. We'll make sure we send that out. And there were a few people that put a couple of questions in the chat pod right at the very end. I'm going to send those on to David and let him respond or correspond with you directly. So thank you everyone for your time today. We appreciate your attentiveness, and we hope to see you again on an LTAP webinar. When I end this webinar in a second, you'll get 3 survey questions. Hopefully you'll fill those out for us just to give us some feedback. Everyone have a good afternoon and stay safe.
Victoria, are you still there?